Lewis Hamilton makes Ferrari history as the seven-time world champion claims sprint victory in Shanghai, as a new lap record sees Oscar Piastri claim pole position for the Chinese Grand Prix. Elsewhere, the drama continues for Liam Lawson as he qualifies in last for the second consecutive qualifying session across all formats. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by lead editor Ian Parks. And Ian, well, another thrilling day in Shanghai. And we've got to start with the driver who grabbed the headlines in the sprint race, Lewis Hamilton, and, well, in the end, quite comfortably converted pole into sprint victory.
As you started by saying, Nick, Ferrari history, Lewis Hamilton history as well. Would you believe that's Ferrari's first sprint victory? It's also Lewis's first sprint victory. And this is the 19th sprint that we have had since its introduction back in 2021. Red Bull had won 12 of those, Mercedes had won 3, McLaren 3, but today, wow, that's a great start for this season now. After everything that had happened in Australia for both Lewis and Ferrari, they've at least come fighting back this weekend. Didn't quite materialise in qualifying, of course. We've got the McLaren on pole position there with Oscar Piastri. As you say, Lewis back in 5th, Charles in 6th. So a bit of work to do, but Lewis says he's got a master plan for the Grand Prix. So watch out for that, folks.
And that's what's really interesting because, of course, Lewis did claim the sprint win. But then, as you mentioned there, in qualifying, he starts in 5th, Charles Leclerc in 6th. And what's even more interesting is actually Lewis's lap time in qualifying was actually a tenth of a second slower than what he managed in sprint qualifying. But, of course, let's mention qualifying a little bit more. And Oscar Piastri, of course, claimed pole position. He also finished second in the sprint race. And it's fair to say that if he can look after his tyres, a lot of money is going to be on Oscar for a win on Sunday.
Which I do remember predicting, if I'm not mistaken, Nick.
Yes,
I think
yes,
I did
carry
come
on,
up with
move
that
on.
one.
Yes,
So, yeah,
quickly.
exactly. In fairness, it was a great performance across all of Saturday from Oscar because he'd started 3rd in that sprint, of course. And it took a while for that race to come alive. Lewis managed to get a good start off the line, pulled across in front of Max, managed to hold his own for those first handful of laps. But then by about the midway point of the 19-lap race, it looked as if Lewis's tyres were starting to go off at the front. Max managed to get back within DRS range, and there was a possibility, only a very short window, mind you, there was a possibility that Max was just going to get Lewis down that long back straight using the DRS into that sharp hairpin, which we know is the prime overtaking place around the Shanghai International Circuit. Lewis at least managed to get through that tyre graining phase, and by that stage the race was pretty much done for him, and it was then a case of Max holding off Oscar, which he was unable to do. Max eventually coming back to within DRS range of Oscar producing the necessary pass to get that second place. Lewis was too far gone at that stage. So then going into qualifying, it looked like, are Ferrari going to get the upper hand again, just as Lewis had managed to do in sprint qualifying? No, it was Oscar, continuing the good form that we'd seen in the sprint, as I mentioned, who produced a really classy pole position, the first of his career. So well done, Oscar Piastri. It's been a long time coming. The first for an Australian driver since Daniel Ricciardo in 2018, and a new lap record to boot as well, because we saw that lap record tumble in sprint qualifying on Friday. Well, it went again today in qualifying. So great performance from Oscar Piastri there. And it looked like at one stage it was going to be an all McLaren front row, just as we'd got in the Australian Grand Prix last weekend. But at the death, and I mean at the death, because this was like the last lap that any driver produced, George Russell managed to split the Mercedes pair. And he says it was done with a little bit of a different strategy, that he opted on that warm-up lap, to start out a little bit slower to ensure that by the end of his hot lap, he'd got more life in his tyres. So that worked a treat for George. So we've got Oscar, George and Lando as the front three. Lando, of course, not very happy again. For the most part, he's had a poor weekend by his own standards, by his own admission, coming into that qualifying session. And even again, he's berating himself a little bit, going on about the mistakes that he's made. And that, of course, has lent itself to the fact that he's going to be 3rd on the grid, but at least in a better position than he was for the sprint, because he started that sprint 6th, of course. following is, by his own admission, a poor sprint qualifying performance on Friday evening.
And that's the thing. It has been a very below par weekend for Lando, and it's really interesting because coming out of Australia, we're speaking about how Lando, should I say, dealt with pressure actually really well. It's been the complete opposite this weekend. Of course, made the mistake in sprint qualifying, which saw him not claim pole. Made a mistake on the first lap of the sprint race, leading to him finishing 8th, picking up just 1 point, and then qualifying in 3rd, seeing his teammate smash the lap record. I mean, Lando, yes, he may have the best car on the grid, but it's fair to say, based on this weekend so far, clearly still has some things he needs to iron out.
Yeah, he's not happy with that car, and he's made it quite clear over the course of these 2 days so far. So it's really strange, isn't it? Just when you think that Lando Norris might have turned a corner with that consummate performance at Melbourne's Albert Park, bearing in mind he scored the Grand Chelem that day, and for anybody that's not quite sure, or maybe not have heard of that expression before, the Grand Chelem is the phrase termed for a driver scoring pole position, fastest lap, and going on to a Grand Prix victory by leading every single lap. So, as I say, that's superb performance. It looked at that stage and everybody was talking about it. Even George Russell had turned around and said that the McLaren was good enough to go on and win every single Grand Prix this year. So far, maybe George might just be right. Maybe McLaren has got the upper hand, but he got that close in qualifying, and we certainly have a McLaren on pole position again. However, for Lando, he's been looking at his own performance again, and as I say, criticizing himself, going on about these little mistakes that he's making. So you do wonder what still needs to be done by Lando to nail these perfect weekends, weekend after weekend, as we've seen other drivers do in the past. Lewis Hamilton, when he was in his prime, I'm going to say prime. We've got a Lewis coming back this weekend, so that's a good sign for the rest of this season. And of course, Max Verstappen over the 4 years, 2023 in particular, when he and that RB19 were absolutely as one in harmony. And you look at Max and what he's achieved, and very rarely has he ever put a wheel out of place. Yet Lando, he keeps going on about these little errors, these little mistakes that he's constantly making. Has he truly got what it takes? He still seems to think there's a lot to work on. We can see that there's a lot to work on if he is criticizing himself in this way. We'll see what he's got for the race on Sunday, of course. Maybe he's got something up his sleeve, like Lewis, as I said, has got this master plan that he's got in mind for his Grand Prix on Sunday.
Just to very quickly run through the top 8 from the sprint race, of course, Lewis Hamilton claimed victory ahead of Piastri, Max Verstappen, Russell, Charles Leclerc, Yuki Tsunoda, Kimi Antonelli and Lando Norris in 8th, picking up the final point. And in qualifying, the provisional top 10 is Oscar Piastri on pole, with Russell alongside him on the front row, Norris 3rd, Verstappen 4th, Hamilton and Leclerc in 5th and 6th, Isaac Hadjar, who we will talk about in a couple of minutes, in a superb P7, Antonelli in 8th, Yuki Tsunoda 9th, and Alex Albon P10. But Ian, Red Bull, and I mean, yet again, you could not have such different moods on either side of the camp. Max Verstappen, yet again, clearly getting the most out of the RB21, 3rd in the sprint race, 4th on the grid for the main race. Liam Lawson, 20th. As I said at the top of the show, the 2nd consecutive qualifying session across any format, so including the sprint, where he's qualified in last. And the damning thing about this is, coming out of Friday, Helmut Marko, Red Bull's motorsport advisor, was saying that, we'll be patient with Liam. It's all okay. We'll see how he does in Japan, a circuit he's raced at before in previous categories. But all of a sudden now he's saying, actually, Isaac Hadjar's, looking quite good.
He's all of a sudden singing the praises of Isaac after criticising the poor boy for crying in his helmet after what happened with that crash on the formation lap of the Australian Grand Prix. So we know what Helmut's like. He can swing from high to low, low to high, across interview to interview. And this is exactly what we're getting right now. He was asked quite pointedly by Sky Germany, what does this mean for Liam Lawson? What does this mean for his future with Red Bull? Is his seat in jeopardy? Now, Helmut has basically decided not to shut that one down with immediate effect. He's kind of left it open by saying, well, it's performance that counts at the end of the day. And if we look at the performances so far of Liam across the Australian Grand Prix, where he's qualified 19th, and especially this weekend, qualifying last in both sprint qualifying and qualifying. That is an absolute unmitigated disaster. Make no bones about it. It is a shocking performance when you think of what that Red Bull is capable of, as we've seen already in the hands of Max Verstappen this year. If Liam was qualifying 9th, 10th, at least getting into the top 10, you could give him a bit of leeway. But to qualify 20th on both occasions, let's make no modes about it. And quite clearly, it's going to be in the mind of Helmut Marko right now after just two. I was going to say two Grand Prix. We've not even had two Grand Prix. This is actually a stage in this season where we still got the second Grand Prix to come. Liam Lawson's seat appears to be already in jeopardy. Now, the bonus for Liam, if there is a bonus, is that, as you mentioned, Nick, we've got Suzuka coming up next in 2 weeks' time. He's at least raced at that circuit in Super Formula, again, as you mentioned. We know he knows the Bahrain International Circuit well, which will be the second race of a triple header that follows this initial season opening double header, Australia and China. Obviously, conducting many laps around that circuit. Then, of course, we've got Saudi Arabia that follows. So you've got to be thinking for Liam, if he is looking at a not just long-term future, but at least getting through this season alone with Red Bull at this stage, he's probably got those 3 races to start doing something to impress Helmut Marko and Christian Horner. Otherwise, they might be looking at making a very swift change indeed. And as you mentioned with Isaac Hadjar, he had a great weekend in Melbourne up until that point where he unfortunately had that unfortunate crash on the formation lap. Could have happened to anyone, just one of those things really, and it just happened to be him, the poor boy. But he's come bouncing back. He's had a great weekend so far, and as you say, great performance in qualifying. Starting 7th, he actually set I think he was second in Q2 if I remember right, Nick.
Yeah.
Brilliant lap in that session, and then 7th when the big guns really came out. So full credit to him getting ahead of Yuki Tsunoda, his teammate. So that's a little feather in his cap there. But what can you do now in the Grand Prix? Has he got what it takes? Because we've not seen him race yet, bearing in mind he didn't actually complete any kind of lap down under in Australia. So still got a lot to do, still got a lot to prove. But right now, the seed has been sown in Helmut Marko's mind, that's for sure, that Liam Lawson is under threat. And maybe, just maybe, it could be Yuki or Isaac somewhere down the line later this season if Liam doesn't start to put his finger out in that Red Bull.
Well, hopefully Isaac does make the start on Sunday so he can get his first Grand Prix start. That's, I think, something we all want. We don't want to see him crash on the formation lap again. I don't think that's even possible. I guess only time will tell. But what's really interesting is when looking, the Red Bull, the RB21, it is clearly, though, so difficult to drive. Max Verstappen on onboards is working overtime on the steering wheel. And in particular, when looking at the lap comparison in Q3, comparing Max to Oscar, Max is stronger when it comes to top speed down the straights, but then the McLaren has the edge everywhere else, showing just, I guess, how many issues Red Bull seem to have. Because it was only on Friday that, despite qualifying second for the sprint race, Max was bemoaning, that the car is just too slow. So with that in mind, Ian, what do you think Red Bull can do in the sprint race? Because as we saw, in the main race, because as we saw in the sprint race, it appears that Ferrari, perhaps in race pace, have a bit of an edge over Red Bull. Mercedes possibly as well, based on how well George has driven this weekend, and quite clearly McLaren. It's going to be tough for Max to get a podium here, surely.
Yeah, the cars have been locked down in part for May now anyway, so they can't make any changes to that car. So I think it's all going to come down to tyre strategy. That's going to be the key to this Grand Prix. We saw during the sprint just how quickly those medium tyres wore. Everybody, all the drivers started on brand new medium tyres for that sprint. And by lap 9, as I mentioned, Lewis's fronts were already going off, although he managed to get through that graining phase. And then by lap 14, 15, I remember Max Verstappen turning around and saying that both his front tyres were dead. What we are going to see, at least in the Grand Prix, of course, is the hard tyre coming to use. Now, that hard tyre has barely had any running across. Well, of course, we had the one practice session, so of course it's
Yeah.
barely had any running. So it's going to be interesting to see which drivers, which cars are going to be able to keep their tires alive for the longest and go through those graining phases to then try and get that extra bit of performance out of them, that extra bit of life that might see them safely then to making those pit stops that are going to be required. So you've got to look at this stage that, barring a great pull off the line from Max, and he's fourth. Bear in mind that he and Red Bull are going to be looking how they're going to play the strategies around the cars around them to ensure that they've got the best chance of getting Max in at least the podium position. Right now, a victory looks a little bit of a long shot for Max. Can never rule it out, of course, because we know what that guy is capable of, how he manages to extract performance from a car where it just does not appear to be there. So, as I say, not ruling him out, but he's got 3 good cars ahead of him at least, especially those McLarens. And in particular, right now, in the hands of Oscar Piastri, that McLaren seems to be a very good car compared to Lando Norris, who is really struggling this weekend. And as I say, keeps on making these little mistakes as well that he's bemoaned about. So it's going to be a fascinating Grand Prix, that's for sure. Got to see how it unfolds because tyre wear is going to be key to it, that's for sure.
I can't wait. And what's crazy is Pirelli have actually predicted that potentially we might see 3 pit stops, which a question to the fans is, when was the last time a dry race featured 3 pit stops for each driver? I think it's probably been a very, very long time. And a reminder to our fans as well that to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Racing News 365, we are still running a prize giveaway. If you'd like to be in with a chance of winning a scale model Formula One car of your favourite team or driver, all you've got to do to be in with a chance of winning is be subscribed to this channel, racingnews365.com, and comment below any video, but just do this one because it's easy. I want to win. It is as simple as that. And if you could like this video as well, that would be very, very kind of you. Ian, amazing stuff as always. Ian and I will be back on Sunday after the Chinese Grand Prix. Who's going to come out on top? Let us know in the comments below. See you later.
I believe we are closing the I Want to Win competition after the Grand Prix. So you're coming up to your last chance, folks, and make sure you get those subscriptions in and also hit that smash the like button. Thanks ever so much. Take care as always.